"I just want to see my balance," he said, his voice cracking just slightly as if admitting something as simple as checking a bank account was a monumental act. His hands were rough from years of work, calloused and steady, yet today they trembled ever so slightly as he held his phone, staring at the screen with a mixture of fear and hope. She looked at him, a kind young woman behind the counter at the bank, and laughed lightly at first, thinking he was joking or perhaps exaggerating the importance of such a mundane task. But the look in his eyes, a mixture of exhaustion, desperation, and pride, stopped her mid-laughter. She motioned for him to sit, curiosity and concern replacing her initial amusement. He was a single dad raising a little boy named Ethan who was just 6 but already seemed wise beyond his years. In some ways he worked long hours at a construction site, lifting beams, hauling materials, and sweating through the summer heat, yet every evening he returned home to read bedtime stories and wipe away tears that came from scraped knees or imaginary monsters under the bed. Money had never been easy to come by after his wife passed away 2 years ago in a sudden car accident, leaving him alone to navigate life and parenthood. But he never complained, never asked for help, and never let Ethan see him falter even when the bills piled up and the fridge grew emptier than he would admit to anyone. That day at the bank, he had saved every penny he could from the last month, hoping to finally afford something small for Ethan, a simple joy he had been postponing for months. The thought of checking his balance felt like peeking into a window of hope or despair. She watched him nervously punch in the numbers, his thumb hovering over the last key for a heartbeat that seemed eternal. The screen lit up, and for a moment she saw his hands stiffen, his breath catching. He looked at her, an unspoken apology in his eyes for whatever numbers might appear. She leaned closer to see, expecting maybe a few $100s at best, thinking she knew the struggle of a young dad raising a child alone. But when she saw the screen, her laughter vanished completely. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The balance was far more than she imagined, not a fortune by any means, but enough to show that his hard work, his sacrifices, and his unwavering determination had paid off in a way that was quietly heroic. Her heart ached at the sheer resilience of this man who had endured so much and yet carried himself with dignity and love. He smiled shyly, almost embarrassed by the attention, but there was a glimmer of pride in his eyes, a spark that only those who fight for their children's happiness understand. The woman behind the counter found herself silently rooting for him, thinking of her own struggles and how often small victories went unnoticed in life. He spoke softly, "I've been saving for a while, just trying to make sure Ethan has a little happiness today." She nodded, realizing that this balance was not about luxury or indulgence, it was about love, about keeping promises that mattered more than money could ever measure. Back at home, Ethan bounced in excitement as his dad walked in with a small, carefully wrapped package. He watched as his father's tired hands struggled to hold the box steady, the strain of long hours evident in the way he moved. But he also saw determination, a quiet celebration of a goal achieved. The gift was small, a simple toy Ethan had mentioned months ago, a figure that sparked his imagination and lit up his eyes with wonder. The boy hugged his dad tightly, unaware of the sacrifices behind that moment. But in that embrace, all the struggles, the sleepless nights, the fear of failure, and the relentless effort to provide felt worthwhile. The next few weeks brought challenges. Of course there were bills to pay, emergencies that never seemed to end, and moments when the weight of responsibility felt unbearable. Yet that day at the bank, that simple act of checking a balance, had become a symbol of hope. It reminded him that perseverance matters, that every effort, no matter how small it seems, accumulates into something meaningful. She, the woman at the bank, continued to think about him, inspired to notice the quiet strength in the people around her, to recognize that courage often comes in forms that are easy to overlook. Months later, that small balance had grown through careful budgeting and unexpected generosity from friends who had noticed his hard work and dedication. The man continued to rise early, work late, and prioritize his son's happiness above his own. Yet in the quiet moments, he allowed himself brief reflections of pride and gratitude. He began to dream again, not just about survival but about creating a future where Ethan would never know the fear of scarcity, where love and effort could manifest in tangible ways beyond daily necessities. One evening, as Ethan slept peacefully after another bedtime story, he sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and reflected on everything they had overcome: the memories of his late wife, the laughter and tears of his son, the struggles he faced every day, and that moment at the bank. All converged in his mind. He realized that success was not measured by wealth but by resilience, by the capacity to keep going when life seemed relentless, by the love that fueled every choice. The woman at the bank never forgot him either. She shared his story quietly with friends and co-workers, not to boast but to highlight the quiet heroes she encountered daily: people who carried invisible burdens with dignity, who showed extraordinary love through ordinary acts, who reminded the world that humanity could still be found in the smallest gestures. Years later, Ethan would grow up understanding the meaning of perseverance and love, seeing in his father a role model who taught him that life's greatest victories are not about wealth or recognition but about staying steadfast in the face of hardship, about giving without expectation, about celebrating small moments that build the foundation for a meaningful life. The story of that day, of a simple request to see a balance, became a lesson not just for the characters involved but for everyone who heard it, a testament to the strength of a single parent, the importance of hope, and the transformative power of unwavering love. And in the quiet hum of their small apartment, where laughter replaced fear and dreams replaced worry, the man smiled once more, knowing that every struggle had led to a moment of triumph, that every sacrifice had nurtured a future brighter than he had ever dared to imagine, and that sometimes, the simplest question, "I just want to see my balance," can reveal the deepest truths about courage, love, and the human spirit. The bank was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights blending with the soft shuffle of papers and distant beeping of machines. He stood at the counter, Ethan's small jacket still folded over his arm, his fingers hovering over the keypad as if entering numbers could somehow summon luck or forgiveness. "I just want to see my balance," he said again, voice steadier but tinged with fear. The teller, a young woman with a warm smile, laughed lightly, not out of malice but disbelief. She didn't yet know the weight behind those words. As she leaned over to look at the screen, the color drained from her face. The numbers weren't astronomical, but they told a story of determination, of late nights and early mornings, of sacrifices that were invisible to the world. The man's eyes met hers, a quiet mix of pride and vulnerability, and for a moment, the bank felt like a stage where courage played itself out in silence. At home, the apartment smelled faintly of rice and old wood. Ethan bounced on the couch, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, oblivious to the struggle his father carried daily. He was 6, but his eyes reflected more wisdom than most adults, a mirror of the resilience he absorbed from watching his dad. After dinner, the man tucked him in, reading the same story for the 100th time, his voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. Outside, city lights flickered against the night, but inside that small apartment, love filled every corner. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee patched with a kiss, every quiet dinner shared, these were the invisible victories that no bank balance could measure. Yet, the tiny balance he had just checked represented a tangible reward, a confirmation that his relentless effort had not gone unnoticed by fate itself. Work was a battlefield of sweat and grit. Steel beams cut into his palms, trucks roared around him, and the sun burned down like a relentless overseer. Every day, he carried not only tools and materials but also the invisible weight of responsibility. Bills loomed, rent deadlines approached, and unexpected emergencies tested his limits. Yet, amidst all this, he never faltered in front of Ethan. He shielded his son from fear, even when nights were sleepless and days felt endless. The balance in the bank was more than money, it was proof that perseverance, no matter how small the steps, led to results. That simple act of checking numbers became a symbol of resilience, a quiet victory that reminded him why he endured every hardship without complaint. The day he brought home the toy for Ethan, the boy's eyes lit up as if the sun had suddenly risen in their small living room. It wasn't expensive or flashy, just a small action figure he had wished for, yet the joy it brought was monumental. His father watched him play, a smile tugging at his tired face. That night, as Ethan slept soundly, the man sat at the kitchen table reflecting on the journey, the grief of losing his wife, the weight of being both mother and father, the fear of failing, and the joy of small victories. He realized that love wasn't just in big gestures, it was in the daily effort, in the small sacrifices, and in the quiet victories that shaped a child's life and nurtured their dreams. Back at the bank, the teller couldn't forget him. She shared his story quietly with friends and colleagues, not to boast but to highlight the quiet heroism she had witnessed. People like him existed everywhere, but they often went unnoticed, their struggles invisible to the world. She started paying closer attention, noticing small acts of courage and perseverance around her. And in her own life, she felt inspired to face challenges with the same quiet dignity she had seen in that man, realizing that human resilience often comes in forms that are subtle yet profoundly moving. Months passed, and the man's life didn't get easier, but it did get brighter. Careful budgeting, small acts of planning, and the occasional generosity of friends who saw his determination gradually turned his bank balance into something that represented security, not luxury. Every effort was now a stepping stone, every sacrifice a brick in the foundation of a life where Ethan would never know scarcity the way his father did. Late at night, sipping tea and listening to the city hum outside, he allowed himself quiet pride, reflecting on the journey and the lessons learned, resilience, love, and the quiet strength it takes to keep moving forward. Years later, Ethan would grow up understanding the meaning of sacrifice and perseverance. He would see in his father a model of courage and unconditional love, a man who showed that life's greatest victories were not about wealth or recognition but about steadfastness, care, and heart. The story of the balance check became symbolic, a lesson in hope and quiet triumph. And in the small apartment, now filled with laughter instead of worry, the father smiled, knowing that every hardship had led to this moment of quiet victory, that every struggle had shaped a future full of possibility, and that sometimes, the simplest acts reveal the deepest truths about human resilience.